Good morning, everybody. With everybody on mute, I can't tell if my sound's working, so hopefully somebody responds to me here.
I can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you, Commissioner Fragola. Hello, Commissioner Beeson.
How are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Good. Good. I'm good. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. And you're back.
That's my sound. Good morning. Good morning.
Yes.
Good morning and welcome to February 22nd, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format enables the Planning Commission to meet, hear from the community, and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. Today, our meeting will begin with a public comment, followed by deliberations and possible action on a Metro Plan and Refinement Plan Amendment zone change, and a work session on the Capital Improvement Program for FY 22-27. There are several housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting format that I need to take care of first. Thank you for your patience while I work my way through them. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by following the access instructions listed on the agenda for the meeting. For those who join the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you join the meeting as an attendee. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't done so already, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speaker's queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click once on the hand icon. For those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. When the public comment begins, our meeting moderator will announce the next two speakers at a time. When it is your turn, the moderator will announce your name and unmute your microphone. Public comment is limited to 10 minutes, so your time to speak will be based on the number of people signed up to speak. Finally, I want to thank everyone again for their patience, flexibility, and good humor as we work through this new virtual meeting format. As always, feel free to contact staff if there is testimony you were not able to provide or wish to get us in a different manner. Now, public comment. Public comment is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the Planning Commission on any topics except for items scheduled for a public hearing or public hearing items for which the record has already closed. The Planning Commission reserves 10 minutes at the beginning of the meeting for public comment. Generally, the time limit for public comment is 3 minutes. However, the Planning Commission reserves the option to reduce the time allowed each speaker based on the number of people requesting to speak. As a reminder, your hand must be raised in the queue for public comment. When it's your turn and your microphone has been unmuted by staff, please state your name clearly before beginning your comments. Staff will let you know when your time is up. When time is concluded, the moderator will mute your microphone and move on to the next speaker. I see we have someone with their hand up.
We have Ed McMahon with his hand up, and I'll bring him in now.
Terrific. Thank you, Ed.
Ed, you might be muted if you're trying to talk.
I was. Sorry about that. I thought you unmuted me. I'll start over. First, I want to thank you for all the great work you've done on the clear and objective standards. You really got into the weeds on that, and just want you to know it's very much appreciated. Hopefully, the council will respect the work you've done on C&O and follow your recommendations. Today, I'm in front of you because I want to talk about the Capital Improvement Program. In the past, what I've witnessed is a lot of citizens with great intent contributing to a capital improvement project, and then 6 to 8 months later, boom, all of a sudden we learn the financial consequences of that approved CIP. For instance, not long ago, I saw the systems development charges increased by more than 50% for transportation and also more than 50% for parks and open space. It just seems to me, maybe it's my accounting background, but it seems to me that before a capital improvement program should be approved, the financial consequences of that program should be right there for the decision makers as well. And I just wanted to put that out there and let you know my concern and let you know that I appreciate your service to our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the commission during public comment session? Okay.
I don't have any other hands up right now.
Okay, terrific. All right. With that, we'll close the public comment session and move on to agenda item letter B, which I believe we have switched. We have switched our orders. So now we're going to move on to deliberations and possible action, Metro Plan and Refinement Plan Amendment / zone change. Rodney Bonner is here to lead us through this exercise. Rodney, take us away.
Okay, good morning. Good to see everyone here. Today we were scheduled to have Planning Commission deliberate and possibly take action on recommending this Metro Plan Amendment, Refinement Plan Amendment, and zone change. While staff were working through and revisiting some of the items, an issue did arise. So before I get into that issue, I just want to provide a little bit of background and additional clarification to the Planning Commission and any interested parties that might be listening, just so we're on the same page. The application package that this item entails is a Metro Plan Amendment, Refinement Plan Amendment, and a proposed zone change. Both plan amendments are proposing to redesignate the subject parcels from light medium industrial to mixed use. And then there's a concurrent zone change, which would implement that redesignation by zoning the parcel Whitaker Special Area with a site review overlay. And furthermore, just for context, the dark outline here outlines the subject properties, two tax lots. And you can see the nearby streets that we'll be looking at here further as we go into the transportation planning rule analysis. As staff understand the testimony, the big issues here that you can see on the vicinity map and zoning are the intersections of Cross Street and Railroad Boulevard, and then near the bottom of the screen at Railroad Boulevard and North Polk. The main issue here is that Cross Place and North Polk run obviously off the screen here into the north, but they don't cross into the adjoining neighborhoods at all. So anyone wishing to drive outside of the immediate vicinity would need to use either of the two intersections I pointed out. Cross Street, despite its name, doesn't really cross the neighborhood at all. It ends right there at that R2 zoning. So with that additional, just revisiting the site so everyone's on the same page, we'll move into the traffic planning rule analysis issue. This slide was presented a couple weeks ago at the public hearing. And this is the real issue that we're looking at, is making sure that the application is in compliance with Goal 12, the transportation planning rule. This is statewide land use planning rule that applies to all cities and counties. And what we're looking at is the level of service provided at these intersections within the planning horizon. And the applicant, we believe correctly, highlighted in these cases that two nearby intersections that would fail. These are in addition to the testimony raised at Railroad and Cross, which underneath both scenarios would actually stay within the level of service. However, the issue here is that regardless of under the current zoning or the proposed zoning, we have two intersections that the outlook is that they will fail. So any additional trips created through the proposed zoning would further degrade this. There's no level that goes past failure. So in the agenda item summary that staff provided, there is a summary in response to testimony. Staff is just attempting to address the key issues raised in the testimony. Much of it is in response to the transportation planning rule analysis. It's not a comprehensive list, and while staff was thoroughly reviewing the submitted testimony and seeking to provide a response, we identify this additional issue. Before I get into the issue again, I just want to revisit the transportation planning rule and the difference between the transportation planning rule, so known as TPR analysis, and a traffic impact analysis, or TIA. This discussion is in the materials that we provided as an attachment to the agenda item summary. But just to quickly review, first and foremost, TPR is a requirement tied to state law that all cities and counties must meet, and it's administered under Oregon OAR 660-012-0060, whereas a traffic impact analysis, or TIA, is a local process required here in Eugene's land use code. The TPR analysis is triggered for land use actions that change adopted comprehensive plans or zoning and rely on a theoretical development potential to anticipate the impacts, whereas a TIA is triggered by a specific development proposal and relies on detailed development and measurements of that detailed development to actually assess the impacts to the transportation system. So the transportation planning rule, as I said, is a statewide planning requirement to direct cities to assess whether a proposed plan amendment or zone change will have a significant effect on the transportation system. In essence, this means that before approving a refinement plan, metro plan, or zone change, or amendments to those plans, cities must determine whether the existing transportation facilities and any planned improvements will provide the adequate capacity to support the new development that would be allowed by the proposed changes. The potential for traffic and congestion from new development is a major concern in Eugene and for communities around the state. So if there's not an adequate planned capacity and a proposed change would result in traffic that exceeds that capacity, a significant effect occurs. And when a significant effect is found to occur, cities must take steps to put land use and transportation in balance. And ways to do this are either adding transportation facilities or improving facilities or intersections, or by limiting land use or modifying standards to tolerate the additional congestion. So how does Eugene determine whether or not a metro plan, refinement plan amendment, or zone change results in a significant effect? In most cases, the key question here is whether the proposed change to designation or zoning results in more traffic than the current zoning. So typically some sort of traffic analysis or impact study is prepared. The analysis compares traffic under the existing zoning and designation versus the proposed plan designation or zoning or zoning. If it's found that the change will generate more traffic than is allowed by the existing plan and zoning, and if the transportation system plan and any specific plan improvements do not provide or will provide adequate capacity to support those proposed uses, then we have a significant effect. Generally speaking, the evaluation of whether there is an effect must consider the range of uses that are allowed by the existing proposed plan designation and zoning and the existing proposed plan designation and zoning. Not just a particular use proposed by an applicant, if that's the case, or particular existing development on the site. This is because the resulting plan designation amendment or the zone change, once approved, would allow any of the uses listed in the zoning district without necessarily further review with compliance under the transportation planning rule. So in response to testimony and commissioners' questions during the public hearing, staff reevaluated the applicant's assumptions and conclusions of the transportation planning rule analysis and found a key issue with the applicant's assumptions. Again, this slide is pulled from our public hearing presentation, And on here, you can see the uses that were applied as a reasonable worst case under the existing I2 zoning. And one of those uses is the applicant's proposal for a 5,000 square foot convenience store. A convenience store up to 5,000 square feet is permitted in the I2 zone under certain limitations. And one of those limitations is that to be in the I2 zone, the subject property has to front a arterial street. The street system in Eugene is classified from major arterials down to local connecting streets and alleys. So major and minor arterials are near the highest classification streets on our transportation system. And as such, in order to allow additional development and commercial activity along these major corridors, this limitation is provided in the I2 zone. Upon further review, Railroad Boulevard is the highest classification street fronting the subject property, and it is not classified as an arterial. It is a major collector. So as such, a convenience store wouldn't be permitted in the I2 zoning. And because of that, staff therefore consider the applicant's TPR assumptions to be in error. Given this new development, staff believe that it's reasonable to allow the applicant the opportunity to revise this trip generation estimates for the worst case trip generation under the current zoning. And this is important because our proposed condition relies on the highest level of worst case trip generation under current zoning, and in essence to allow a greater mix of use, a greater mix of zoning uses that would be allowed under the special Whitaker zone without exceeding the traffic that would be allowed under the current zoning. We're suggesting a trip cap. And in order to ensure that that condition is accurate before moving on, so that Planning Commission's recommendation is accurate and factual as possible before going to City Council, we would like the applicant to have the opportunity, and then staff and the public, the opportunity to review a revised trip generation cap number. So the current number is 453. As we pointed out, that's based on faulty numbers. We believe that the applicant can come back and provide a more accurate, reasonable worst case scenario. So given that, we've reached out to the applicant. They're willing and agreed to reopening the record to have the opportunity to resubmit a revised worst case scenario under the existing zoning. In order to allow staff and the public enough time to review that, we're proposing that Planning Commission reopen the public record for following a similar 7-7 format, where the first stage is any new evidence and argument, the second stage is responsive, and then the third is for the applicant's final argument. We're proposing to follow that same outline, but allowing an additional 7 days for that first stage. So it would be now, instead of 7, 7, 7, 14, 7, and 7. Like I said, the applicant is okay with that. Staff also did receive an email from Fred Tempfer requesting that the record be extended. So we believe that the recommended motion that is on the next slide meets his request as well. So given that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I hope I've cleared up the difference between the TPR and TIA and why the TPR condition is important. And we've provided a draft motion if Planning Commission agrees with the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodney. Commissioners, do we have questions or any discussion? Commissioner Borowski, yes.
Thanks, Rodney. You made that pretty clear. The only question that I had was, are there other uses that are allowed in that zone that are as trip intensive as the convenience store that could be put in there? you know, because you basically are taking some allowed uses and seeing what types of trips they generated. They picked a convenience store, which has a fairly high trip generation. I'm just wondering if you know if there's other uses that are allowed that aren't restricted by the street classification that are near to what a convenience store is.
Yeah, good question. The short answer is I don't think so. And I say that with the caveat that trip generation is based on the ITE, I believe it's International Traffic Engineer Manual. I don't own or frequently review that manual, so it's slightly outside of my area of expertise, which is somewhat limited to the Land Use Code, Chapter 9. That said, we looked briefly, and I think that convenience stores are definitely one of the highest traffic generators, and because of the limitations of the site not being located on a arterial and that classification not likely to change within the planning horizon, I don't see any other uses right off the bat that would be approaching the type of generation numbers we see with the convenience store. That said, the applicant, we would be open to considering, not necessarily just removing the 5,000 square foot convenience store. Obviously, they can remove that. That will open up some different types of opportunities and constraints with the site. So we might see a new use or a change in size to the current analysis. So just a heads up on that.
Okay, Gabe Block.
Thank you. Just a little follow-up on that. One of the things that we recognize as part of this recommendation to reopen the record is that the analysis that we're relying on is at least partly, if not largely, dependent on the traffic engineer analysis on the part of the applicant. And so we think it's important in order to be able to revise that analysis and sort of looking at the question that Commissioner Borofsky raised, it will be up to the applicant and their engineer to present a revised set of, as we call, worst case scenario assumptions. So we're not in a position at this point to either specifically answer that question or, and I would add that planning staff has some reliance, of course, on the Public Works Department for their expertise as well in vetting that. We will be looking at, in the event of a reopening of the record, new evidence, right? So that's why we feel it's important not only to have the additional time during that initial open record period for them to provide the evidence, but for us to evaluate it and then come back to you with the recommendation. So we cannot predict at this point whether the trip cap number, that maximum number would be the same, potentially higher or less. I think Rodney is right that there are a variety of uses in the industrial zone that would also be allowed, but I would say from my experience that, but no expertise really as a traffic engineer, that the convenience store use is certainly a high traffic generator compared to typical industrial uses, right? And the high traffic generators like retail uses are typically, while they're on the one hand, the higher traffic generator, they're also limited very much in the context of industrial zones. So we'll need that time, I think, in order to carefully consider their new evidence and sort of procedurally, in order to even look at that, we will definitely need to reopen the record if the Planning Commission so chooses. So I'll leave it at that.
Commissioner Fragola, followed by Commissioner Edwards.
I just want to say I'm in support of the recommendations from staff. I appreciate your thoroughness and due diligence in this important planning process, especially as this was very much the concerns that were raised by the community. I did have a question regarding the chart with the grade of F in it. Was I reading it correctly that this area is failing in their number of trips regardless of the change or not, that it's already failing under the current? And I was wondering, because I'm just wondering if we're looking at an area that's already exceeding the traffic capacity and what that means for our public planning process in this part of the city.
So that's a good question. And to clarify, you are correct. So even if nothing changes, and the Planning Commission doesn't recommend approving the proposed designation and zoning here, even if everything else stays the same, these two intersections are predicted to hit the level of service F within the planning horizon. And obviously there's no level of service below F, there's no F minus, but any additional trip that would be created would be considered the significant effect. You know, the transportation system plan, you know, is an adopted plan, and it does consider car traffic, but it does also try and balance that with bicycle, pedestrians, public transit, and carpooling. If you look at the level of service, you know, I'm not an engineer, so you can see what the difference is there for an unsignalized intersection. And perhaps we'll be able, you know, when a new transportation system plan is adopted, these intersections might be evaluated and improvements can be made publicly. It's just difficult at this time, outside of a trip cap condition. A lot of the testimonies, you know, saying that more should be done, and, you know, up to requiring the applicant to install a traffic light. But it's difficult at this point, theoretically, to establish what the ratio or relationship of a theoretical development is with an actual physical improvement that could be required. So before I go off anymore, I hope that helps answer the question. You are correct in your reading of the table.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, like I said, I support the staff's diligence and recommendations. I'm just noting for myself that we have a region of the city that is already at capacity and probably needs improvements made regardless of what goes on that site. So thank you.
Commissioner Edwards.
Thank you, Chair Ramey. My question, and Commissioner Fraglet touched on one of the questions I had, so thank you for that clarification. But my question is that, hypothetically speaking, if we were to approve a zone change, is there an additional process that would further refine a trip cap based on more certainty around the proposed development? Or would this, you know, if let's, again, hypothetically, we were to impose a trip cap, is that the number that they would need to comply with, regardless of what they end up doing as development in the eventual development of the site? Or is there like a follow-up process?
Yeah, great question. So there are potentially two follow-up processes that would look more detailed at an actual development proposal. So actual buildings, densities, parking, specific uses, even operational characteristics like business hours and things like that. And those two review steps would be a site review. The applicant, the site is partially, about 80% has a site review overlay applied. The site review overlay triggers a site review application which is a type 2 application that reviews offsite impacts, building bulk. Offsite impacts includes odor, glare, traffic. So that site review is triggered anytime a new building is constructed on a otherwise vacant site, or an addition of 20% or more of the building floor area. So any substantial change on the site would trigger that within the current overlay would trigger a site review, and the applicant is proposing to retain and to expand it to include the entire site. So that about 20% that wouldn't trigger a site review today would also be under the site review. Furthermore, most development here would trigger, could potentially trigger a traffic impact analysis, which is housed within the Eugene code. The typical triggers, the TIA is, to ensure that substantial developments which generate significant traffic or cause an increase in traffic can contribute to a problem in the area, are reviewed, and specific mitigation can be either required or proposed by the applicant. A common trigger for TIA in Eugene is developments that generate 100 or more trips during a peak hour, as determined by the Institute of Transportation Engineers Manual. That's what ITE is. Sorry, I misidentified that earlier. So as it relates to this property, a TIA may be triggered in the future based on the number of trips generated by future development.
So really quickly, what I'm hearing then is that regardless of a trip cap that we could theoretically establish here in this zone change process, because of the site review overlay, they're very likely going to have this process refined and a trip cap or whatever provisions established that are very specific to the development of the site, regardless. It's kind of what I'm hearing.
I would say, in essence, that's correct. Obviously, there could be some exceptions, and if it's a future use that is generating less than that 100 trip threshold, then the TIA wouldn't be triggered. But like I said, the TIA is for more or less substantial impacts to the transportation system through specific proposed development.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful.
Gabe, did you want to step in here quickly?
Yeah, thank you. Just one other clarification. There's essentially a third prong to the possible review of the trip cap, or more specific traffic impacts from development that might actually be proposed in the future. Obviously, we don't have a specific proposal at this stage. We don't require one. We cannot require one. But in the event that the applicant comes forward with a revised analysis that can show that the trip cap could be modified, for example, if there are planned facilities or other intersection improvements that might occur independently, right, or based on their actual development proposal, the way the condition is proposed that we are recommending to the Planning Commission, we think we need a clear and specific number based on that worst case analysis, which is theoretical now. But in the event of an actual development proposal, if they can show that the conditions have changed or that the trip cap can be modified with an engineering analysis, they can actually modify that through the language of the condition. So even if a proposal doesn't trigger a TIA, they have that option to come back and present a different, more specific analysis at some point to change that trip cap.
Commissioner Beeson, followed by Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, kind of following up on Commissioner Fraggle and Commissioner Edwards. I was kind of struggling with the same. We've got two intersections now that have a level of service that doesn't meet the standard. We really have, I think you've noted in the written material, we have a significant effect right now, aside from any zone change, at two different intersections. So we're going to go forward with this process, or going forward with the idea that the zone change, if and when it's approved, would have the trip cap, so that we're not any worse off in terms of projected traffic trips, I guess, than we are presently. And then at such time that they decide that there is a proposal, or there is a specific development proposal, and assuming it meets the 100 trips standard, whatever standard it is that triggers the traffic impact analysis, that would be required at that point. And I think where I'm trying to go with this, would that be a logical point where assuming they did that and assuming we still have a level of service issue on the two intersections where that would trigger a requirement on the part of the developer to do some sort of traffic mitigation to correct the level of service issues? And if not, maybe my more general question would be, at what point, back to Commissioner Fragala's question, I guess, at what point in this is that sort of mitigation triggered?
Okay, I'm assuming Jeff may be the right one to answer this question since his hand is up, but I don't.
Yeah.
The right one?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just really quickly state,
Okay.
Commissioner Beeson, you're on the right track there, which is that right now the reason that we're not going after mitigation is because it's a theory. So we use this trip cap to basically keep everything where it's at, and then at the time of future development, when they have an exact proposal, there's kind of two prongs here. They've got one option where if they are going to go over their trip cap, they can voluntarily go through a TIA to amend that trip cap and mitigate whatever impacts they're going to have. They also might trigger a TIA just generally if they do generate more than 100 trips, and they trigger it in a traditional sense. So there's kind of those two captures in which they're going to have to mitigate their potential traffic impacts through both of those processes. And then additionally, you have the other review through the site review process if they trigger that process as well. So there's two traffic impact prongs, and then there's the site review as well. So you're on the right track there.
And I'll just add that, yes, with the traffic impact analysis and a more specific proposal, we then look at operational characteristics, right? Driveway locations, turning movements, the amount of cars that might be pushed through any given intersection. That's the point at which we can have an actual, I think, a fair discussion about what kind of traffic warrants are met for whether it's a signal or might be a stop sign or other traffic control devices that could be implemented to actually mitigate that traffic impact.
Okay. So I mean, if we go through with this and get the zone change in place, it would be at such time as there was specific development proposed that this issue would be addressed more specifically.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. So I wanted to just clarify something with staff, is that at this point, just because of the TPRA needing to be updated, are we then going to be looking at that trip cap condition of approval later on in our review process after we receive the updated TPRA? I just want to verify what that timing looks like. Thanks.
That's correct. Like I said, we would recommend the Planning Commission reopen the record today, and then allow, that 1477, and then once the record is closed, once we've gotten the schedule out, we'll go ahead and schedule the next Planning Commission deliberation where we can again dive into these details based on testimony and arguments, presented by the applicant and any other interested parties. So there'll definitely be more opportunity to dig into the conditions language, the applicant's traffic planning rule analysis and their assumptions. So that's correct.
Did you want to follow up there, Commissioner Taylor?
Yeah, I wanted to go ahead and make a motion thank you very much, to reopen the record for this application as outlined in the staff recommendation up on the screen now.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, I think we got a second. A motion by Commissioner Taylor, seconded by Fragala first, Isaacson second. So thank you both. Now we have discussion. I wanted to, yes, Lauren Summers, do you want to jump in here first?
Thank you, Commissioner Ramey. I just wanted to, it's a very long motion, so I don't want anyone to read the whole thing, but on the off chance that someone who is listening can't see, for whatever reason, the motion that's up on the screen. I just wanted to articulate by voice the ending of the open record periods. So the first open record period would be beginning now and end at 5 p.m. on Monday, March 8th. And during that open record period, anyone can submit written testimony, which includes evidence and argument on kind of on any matter. The second open record period would be would close on Monday, March 15th. And during that open record period, anyone can submit written testimony, but it should directly respond to testimony that was submitted during the first open record period. And then the third open record period is only for the applicant and the applicant may only submit argument. And that third open record period closes on Monday, March 22nd at 5 p.m. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I know Commissioner Isaacson and we didn't really get a swing at this one, and we can use our time now if we want, but I'm in favor of this, but I did have a question about the trip cap. So the trip cap can be uncapped, so it's not a forever cap, but who is the decider in the uncapping of the trip cap?
So it would be, as specified in the condition, a type 2 application. Essentially what that means is that it's a planning director level decision. It does involve public notice in advance and then a written decision that is appealable. In the event of an appeal, it would actually go to our hearings officials. So in that process, it would not come back to Planning Commission, just as a reminder. Okay,
that's what I don't usually guess on those kinds of things, but I might have guessed that on that one. So yes, Commissioner Isaacson.
So I understand where we're going with this, and I'm fine with voting for it, or at least moving to the next stage. But I'm cognizant of the fact that the area cannot sustain the given traffic under its current condition. My question is that for the people who are going to be putting it in, are we getting a little bit of a false hope that if they put this an application in, it'll get rezoned for them? I mean, how do we have any idea from the city on what the plan is for this intersection? I mean, I will use this as an example. The River Road area right now is having a conversation about putting in a light or a pedestrian crossing at Hatton Avenue, which is where I live, because of the fatality that happened. And I've been talking with the city and going over that whole process of what it costs. So I'm fairly cognizant of how expensive these things get and how limited the funds are available to it. So if we're going down this long rabbit hole of getting folks queued up so that this could be approved in the future, knowing that without it, it probably wouldn't be if it's, for example, a mini mart or convenience store or something along those lines. Is there a provision that would mitigate some of that cost by pushing it to the developer to say, you know, a light is going to cost $1 million. So if you come to the table with half, the city is committed to doing a portion of thereof, so that we kind of greenlight some of this. Otherwise, a lot of this is going to be for naught if it's not in the city's plan for the next year or so.
So just briefly, I appreciate the question, Commissioner Isaacson. There is no guarantee, right, in terms of the future outcome of a traffic impact analysis. But one of the responsibilities that the city has in reviewing that is to ensure that any physical mitigation that the city might require is proportional to the impact of the development. And so through that process of evaluating the specific development proposal, we look at a variety of factors, but it's going to really depend on the level of service at those intersections, how much traffic is really being contributed from this development specifically, and then whether or not we have the legal authority under constitutional requirements for making what we call exactions to require the developer to pay for those improvements. But I can tell you that we do very closely scrutinize those types of traffic impact analyses to determine what's the proportional requirement that we can legally leverage for the developer to pay their fair share, so to speak.
So I've got Taylor followed by Borowski.
I just want to make a comment. I'm not sure if it's helpful, but the way I understand this is we've got, Planning Commission has very specific criteria for what's in front of us. So a lot of our questions are not relevant at this time. So, and we can't really micromanage it at this point. It's really attached to a proposed development. So it really is the burden of the client if they're making a proposal to have this zone change, that they feel comfortable with whatever those consequences are. And they, I mean, staff, I'm sure they have professionals. I'm sure staff have talked to them throughout the process, so they're aware of what they're proposing. So, you know, our review at this point is limited to the criteria in front of us. Thanks.
Commissioner Borowski.
Thanks. Yeah, I was going to kind of dovetail onto what Commissioner Taylor just said, and just give a little bit of also historical perspective. So when people look at that table and say it's going from E to F, that is a result of some of the decisions that we made a few years back when we adopted the transportation system plan. You know, we lowered the level of service that was an acceptable level of service from D to E. And then if an impact drops at a level of service, that's when mitigation would be required. And mitigation could be a traffic light, but mitigation could also be some sort of a plan where they're giving their employees bus passes, or that they're providing bicycle, infrastructure that would help ease the traffic impact of a specific development. These are all things that were put forward in that transportation system plan. And one of the reasons that I hate to say this, but one of the reasons that we went from D to E as level of service was, if people have to wait in their car a little bit longer, they may be more inclined to use alternate forms of transportation. And that was a conscious decision that actually came before the Planning Commission and came before the City Council when that plan was adopted. So that's just kind of a little bit of historic. Just because it goes to F doesn't mean that it has to be mitigated at that moment. There's a plan, and the city will move forward with where it feels appropriate.
Great. Well, I appreciate the reminder of keeping us in our lanes here, and I will admit to being partially responsible. I wanted to switch the order of the agenda today so we had more time to talk about these issues, because there are many of us to whom these issues are relatively new, or I'm the worst case is someone who has a little bit of knowledge but not enough to really know what's going on. So I think this is partly a process that allows us to become educated about how this works, and that will really be a benefit as we go forward. I want to be sure we could do that without the sort of time pressure of the end of the meeting crashing on us. So thanks to the staff and everyone else for switching the agenda items, and thanks for your patience, senior commissioners, to let us learn a little bit about what we're doing here as we go. I think it'll help us in the long run. Having said all that, there's a motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. I'm going to call for the question. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand where I can see it. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is a unanimous vote. Carries this motion forward. Rodney, thank you very much. I gave others that were involved in bringing this to us and helping us through it. Jeff, I forgot your name there. Thanks again for coming today and moving this forward. I think with that, we're ready to go to agenda item. I think it was like C or something. Are we up to C? No, we're up to agenda item C, ABC. And for that, we have Vicki Silver here to walk us through the capital improvement program for FY 22-27.
I'm Vicki Silvers, Assistant Finance Director of City of Eugene. I'm going to turn it over to my staff, Carrie Wilhite, and I believe Jeff and Jennifer are with her to do the presentation.
Good.
Hello. Hello, my name is Carrie Wilhite. I am with the Central Budget Office, and with me today to present are Jeff Perry, the Division Manager for Public Buildings and Facilities, and Jennifer Willer, the Acting City Engineer. So I'll just kick off today's presentation by sharing my screen. Here we go. And I'll be giving just a brief overview and then turn it over to Jeff and Jennifer to give some details. The CIP is a multi-year planning document that serves as a roadmap for the city's capital projects for fiscal years 22 to 27. It is also a budget document. Once the capital improvement program is approved, these projects become the city's capital budget for the next 2 fiscal years. Capital projects are resource intensive and they require significant advanced planning to execute. A multi-year capital plan is considered best practice for local governments, and the CIP process helps us connect our spending with our goals and the community's needs. This diagram shows the basic process by which a project goes from idea to construction to use. Beginning in the upper left corner, a capital need is identified and analyzed by engineers, and then more detailed plans are made to align the project with available funds, as well as to receive input from the community. Once funding and project plans are in place, the CIP is developed and presented to the Budget Committee, which was another opportunity for members of the public to weigh in, both in public comment and in feedback from the citizen members of that committee. And then, of course, we're presenting to you, the Planning Commission. And the City Council will review and approve the CIP in March. And those capital projects that receive appropriation authority will continue through the budget process. The next phase of planning and design and building will then begin. So this shows a few ways that we have improved this year's capital improvement program. So in the FY20 CIP, the last one we did, greenhouse gas reporting was added in an effort to meet the goals of the Climate Recovery Ordinance. This year's CIP improves upon greenhouse gas reporting. For example, Public Works was able to estimate greenhouse gases for nearly all stormwater, wastewater, and transportation projects. Also initiated in that last CIP was the transition from buckets of work to project-specific reporting in order to increase transparency. And this year's CIP continues that effort with a total of 131 projects or programs identified. One change in this year's CIP is that we placed more focus on identifying what operating costs will be above current operating levels as a result of adding these capital projects. This change is triggered by the new Government Finance Officers Association criteria for the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. Estimating and reporting these operating costs helps the city meet this requirement and helps us plan ahead for future operating budget needs. The CIP is divided into 6 areas. All projects fall into one of these program areas. You'll note that the airport has the largest portion of the CIP with 11 projects totaling $96 million. This chart clarifies the funding status of CIP projects across different areas. The dark blue is funding identified, and that shows projects with a likelihood of receiving available funds, such as grants, systems development charges, and donations. The light blue portions are projects with secured or dedicated funding, such as stormwater and wastewater user fees, bond funding, and transfers from operating funds. And then a little more detail about those funding sources. With over $288 million in anticipated capital funding, this image is meant to show the variety of funding sources. As you can see, the Federal Aviation Administration is by far the largest source of funding for the FY22 CIP. And now I will turn it over to Jeff Perry, the Division Manager for Public Buildings and Facilities.
Thanks, Carrie. Hello, I'm here to review the CIP for public buildings and related capital projects the Facility Management Division is responsible for. The city maintains a wide variety of public facilities, including community centers, swimming pools, fire stations, parking structures, office buildings, park facilities, historic buildings, and the public library. In total, the city maintains and preserves more than 185 buildings totaling over 2 million square feet. In addition to maintaining existing facilities, the city also plans for and constructs new, updated, and expanded facilities to meet the needs of our community. The general fund is the primary source of funding for preservation and maintenance of public buildings and facilities, with funding for major renovations and new buildings coming from dedicated and external sources, such as the recent Parks and Rec bond. Public buildings and facility projects are derived from several adopted plans, facility condition reports, and feedback from customers and facility maintenance staff. The plans that guide our work include the Parks and Rec System Plan, the Facility Condition Index, the Public Works Facilities Master Plan, the Parking Structure Condition Analysis, ADA requirements, and LEED certification for major construction projects. Capital improvement projects for general fund public facilities fall under the following categories. New capital facilities. Projects in this category typically provide for either new or replacement of facilities or projects that expand existing facilities and are on such a scale to warrant classification as standalone projects. Large-scale facility changes that are needed to provide for community growth are found in this category of projects. Facility preservation and maintenance. These projects preserve, maintain, and repair systems associated with existing facilities and are divided into 6 preservation and maintenance categories. That includes exterior preservation and maintenance, flooring and interior upgrades, hazardous remediation, parking lot and pavement maintenance, re-roofing and siding projects, and then contingency and emergency projects. General site and facility improvements. Projects in this category include modifications or additions to existing facilities to meet operational, safety, and cost efficiency goals and to comply with the ADA. The primary goal of this program is to address changing program functions and needs to improve service delivery. These projects often have a limited impact on operating costs, as their purpose is to upgrade or reconfigure space for more effective service delivery. Some recent enhancement projects our team has assisted with include community center technology improvements, HVAC upgrades at Washington Park Community Center, security and fencing improvements at Fire Station 9, and then enhancements and repairs to the Spencer Butte ropes course. Over the next several months, our internal facility board will be helping prioritize future projects as well. Next slide, please. All right, the CIP includes over $40 million allocated for the city's buildings and structures. The majority of projects are funded with general fund capital project dollars and about $4 million dedicated for the preservation and maintenance of general fund facilities. As you'll note, there's about $10.9 million budgeted in the Parks and Rec bond, and 5.1 of that will be for the upcoming Sheldon Pool project. Next, I'll talk about some specific projects our team will be working on in the upcoming CIP. Exterior repairs. And so while we managed several large roofing projects in the last CIP and have several more scheduled, there also seems to be there not just seems to be, but there are several major siding projects we'll be focusing on in the upcoming fiscal years. In addition to work that's currently underway at the Public Safety Training Building, siding replacement is also scheduled for Fire Station 2, directly next door, and also at the Second and Chamber site, I'm sorry. The building's exterior siding panels have been found to be deficient and are causing leaks. As you'll note in the photo on the left side, it's a shot of the failing siding, and there's some dry rot you can see coming through there. The Eugene Police Department headquarters building is also scheduled for siding repairs in the upcoming fiscal year. Both projects are critical since failure to address them can result in water penetration and significant damage to the interior of the building. Capital preservation and maintenance budget is also used for the repair of historic buildings. Significant foundation repairs were made to the Morse family facility pictured above, and a complex boiler replacement project was completed at the Sheldon McMurphy Johnson House this last fiscal year. There is also exterior preservation. There is also an exterior preservation project scheduled for Sheldon McMurphy that will include the removal of dry rot, siding repair, and will address some drainage issues that are contributing to the problem. Similar to the public safety projects, it's critical to repair and correct the problem in order to avoid interior damage to the building. It's also important to note that historic buildings are often more costly to repair since they're older facilities and constructed to different standards. Plus, any major alterations to the building needs to be consistent with the original design. Over the last several years, the CIP has heavily invested in the modernization and repair of public elevators. All 4 elevators at the Eugene Library were modernized, along with elevators in the Holt, Parkade, and Pearl Street garages. Looking forward, upgrades to the Atrium and Holt Center patron elevators are currently being planned for in the upcoming fiscal year. The 3 Overpark garage elevators are a high priority project that will be scheduled once funding is available. Equity and contracting continues to be a priority for the Facility Management Division. We're tracking participation through solicitation documents, utilizing the state of Oregon's COBID database, and participating in open houses and reverse trade shows. The central purchasing office within finance has also been extremely helpful for our team. They recently updated their website and they have a lot of resources we work with them on collaboratively. One of the most exciting initiatives our team is working on are the Parks and Recreation bond projects. The bond covers renovations at Echo Hollow Pool, Campbell Community Center, and Sheldon Pool. All 3 projects will meet LEED standards. The Campbell Community Center project adds roughly 6,000 square feet of new space, including classrooms, a large meeting room, and exercise facilities, along with aesthetic and functional improvements to the existing section of the building. The photo on the slide above or on the left shows a shot of the newly constructed building that's facing west or east. And then on the right side is the new staff entry space. And if you haven't been in Campbell a long time, it really is a big improvement. We're very excited. The Echo Hollow Pool project includes the addition of a large outdoor pool that will better accommodate competitive swimming, water polo, and diving. A new recreational pool with a large slide and play features is also part of the project. Both Echo Hollow and Campbell are scheduled to be completed within the next several months. We are scheduled to break ground on Sheldon Pool once the Echo Hollow project is complete. Sheldon will include repairs to the facility, a new warm water vortex pool with play features, and a new HVAC heat pump system. The project will also include the addition of a hot tub, which was by far the most requested amenity we received from the public when we were soliciting feedback. Sheldon is scheduled to take a little less than a year to complete and will open in the first half of 2022. And the photos here are just renderings, but pretty similar to what the design will be once the project's complete. Meeting the climate recovery ordinance goals is a high priority for the capital budget and facilities division. In 2016, Solarc Energy Group produced a report outlining several paths to meet CRO goals related to the operation of city buildings. The recommended strategies included energy efficiency projects, such as LED lighting upgrades, retro commissioning building systems, and fuel switching HVAC systems from the use of natural gas to electricity to help reduce the use of fossil fuels. We are currently upgrading the HVAC system at the Second and Chambers Public Safety Facility, which will switch from natural gas to an electric heat pump. The project will not only improve performance, but it will also substantially reduce our GHG emissions. The Campbell Community Center, Echo Hollow Pool, and Sheldon Pool projects all include the replacement of major HVAC systems and fuel switch from natural gas to electricity as well. Echo Hollow also includes a large photovoltaic solar array that will help offset energy use. In total, the 3 projects will reduce our carbon emissions by 575 metric tons per year, which is almost an 80% reduction compared to our 2010 baselines. The projects will actually impact the overall building emissions, GHG emissions, by 30% reduction as well. And keep in mind, all 3 projects that we're constructing, the bond projects, include expanded square footage and aquatic space for the pools. Facilities leverages several different technologies to track the condition of our facilities and respond to routine work requests. Our operations and maintenance team utilizes a work order tracking system for preventative maintenance. We also utilize a predictive modeling tool and database to track the condition of all general fund buildings and structures. As part of our HVAC upgrade projects, we're also including new digital controls and hardware that will be easier to maintain and operate for our technicians and help reduce operational costs. Although it's not super exciting, it's a photo of one of those units on the right there. We're also excited about a new energy management system we are currently implementing that will allow staff to track incremental energy use, which will help us quickly identify building issues such as water leaks and excessive energy use. Pictured in the funny photo above is one of our HVAC technicians. It was actually one of the few photos I could actually get of them because they're always on the move. But the team has just done a tremendous job of ensuring our systems are running properly and efficiently. And it's really been critical this year with the pandemic and smoke emergency. So just a shout out to that group. They've done a good job. A key indicator we track in our database is the Facility Condition Index, or FCI, to determine a building's overall condition. A lower FCI percentage represents a building that's in better condition, and a high FCI usually means that the facility is needing some sort of repair or improvement. Our goal is to maintain a good FCI rating, which means 15% of the facility is in need of some minor repair or renovation. So the lower the FCI, the better the condition. And as you'll see, the pie chart in this slide represents all general fund facilities, and slightly less than 3/4 have a good FCI, and about 25% rate is fair. So those will be areas we want to target. This is actually a really exciting slide for a pie chart. This one represents the condition of all recreation facilities in 2018 and the projected FCI index of the same facilities once all of the bond funded projects are complete. Although there are still facilities in need of repairs and enhancements, it's pretty exciting to see such a major improvement. And so you can see that there's a big chunk there. 63% in 2018 was in fair condition, and now we have almost 3/4 of our buildings will result in a good condition or better. All right, and this chart represents deficiencies by distress. And as you can see, almost 75% of our total deficiencies are based on systems beyond their projected service life. This is actually good news due to proactive this is good news. The good news is that due to proactive preservation and maintenance, we're able to significantly extend the service life and help reduce long-term capital investment costs. And so basically, the better we maintain our existing equipment and do preventative maintenance on it, the longer those systems will last. So we're able to push that number out into the future and get more use out of those systems. Now I'm going to hand it off to Jennifer to discuss Public Works projects. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jennifer Willer. I'm the acting city engineer for the engineering division of Public Works, and I'm going to summarize all the Public Works portions of the CIP. So bear with me here because it's going to be pretty rapid. So first off, the overall guides and plans that we use for the Public Works portion of the plan. These are the 3 primary guides that we use to identify and prioritize projects across all our service areas. And I included a picture of the cover of the capital or the Climate Action Plan, or CAP 2.0, just because this is the implementing document of the CRO, and it really is used to direct our specific actions, as well as the criteria that we use to identify and prioritize projects. And there are going to be examples throughout my presentation on how we do this in each service area. Next slide. So for each service area, I'll quickly review these 4 highlights. In addition to the overall plans or guides shown on the previous slide, I'll also show you some service area specific guides or plans. I'll review the service area funding. I'll summarize a high-level review of climate actions associated with each service area. And I'll also highlight a few planned projects. So next slide is onto airport. Next slide. So for the airport specific guides, the capital projects for the Eugene Airport are identified by the Eugene Airport Master Plan and the 5-year Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, Capital Improvement Plan. Next slide. As mentioned by Carrie, the airport portion of the CIP includes $95.9 million in capital projects over the next 6 years. Capital projects are funded by a mix of FAA Airport Improvement Program grants, passenger facility charges, and airport revenue, with a significant portion of the airport funding coming from airline operations and passenger revenues. As you may expect, the global pandemic has had an impact on funding, but we do have reasons to be positive. First, despite the drop in passengers over the last year due to the pandemic, thanks to $22.6 million in CARES Act funding, the airport has been able to maintain operations and fully fund planned improvements during this period. Second, the Eugene Airport continues to outpace national numbers in passenger traffic. This past week, Eugene saw 50% of our 2019 passenger traffic compared to the national passenger traffic at 46% of 2019 levels. As you might recall, there was an American Airlines announcement last month about a new nonstop route from Eugene to Dallas-Fort Worth. So the Eugene Airport is still a very attractive place for people to fly in and out of. Next slide. As noted in the airport master plan, aircraft and ground access vehicles that are not under the control of the airport typically generate more greenhouse gas emissions than airport controlled sources. Additionally, the airport has little control over the paving specifications, which are dictated by FAA for airfield operations. This means the airport focuses on buildings. Projects such as the Airport Terminal Planning Study and the Terminal Building Concourse C Addition offer significant opportunities for green building. I also want to highlight that there is interesting information about the Eugene Airport's participation in a pilot project to develop a national zero or low emissions roadmap at airports. And just as a side note on the paving piece, although the FAA has limited the paving specifications on the airfield side of the facility, the landside operations take advantage of paving techniques that reduce embodied greenhouse gas emissions as described in the CAP 2.0 and followed by engineering's transportation projects. So on to some project highlights. Great. Reconstruction of Concourse C apron is one of the new capital project facilities included. This project will remove and replace existing asphalt pavement that is under strength and unable to support the aircraft that operate at Eugene Airport. This project is also a predecessor project that is required to develop Concourse C, which is described in the master plan approved by the FAA. Another project in the new capital facilities category includes the Terminal Facilities Planning Study. The airport master plan identified the need for expanded terminal facilities, and this is the advanced planning study that will begin conceptual design and layout, as well as estimate the cost of expanding the airline ticket offices and the new Concourse C. Next slide. Some examples of preservation and rehabilitation projects include major taxiways, Charlie and Mike, are identified in the airport pavement management plan to be rehabilitated in FY24. And the area next to the terminal used to service larger commercial aircraft that was previously referred to as taxiway golf will be reconfigured into a larger terminal ramp area. This will reduce pilot confusion and increase safety around the terminal building. And next, on to Parks and Open Space. So next slide. Parks and Open Space capital projects listed in the FY22 through 27 CIP are consistent with projects and priorities identified in the City Council adopted 2018 system plan and the accompanying Parks and Recreation Bond and Operating Levy. Next slide. This CIP continues the first phase of implementation of the 2018 system plan through the Parks and Recreation Bond that voters authorized in May of 2018. The Parks and Open Space portion of the CIP includes $32.3 million in capital projects over the next 6 years. With approximately 70% of parks and open space land designated as natural area parks, the majority of the system's greenhouse gas impacts and associated efforts to reduce emissions are related to the remaining 1,500 acres of developed park areas. Emissions related to developed park areas are largely the result of construction materials and construction and maintenance activities. Staff regularly look for more efficient, innovative, and environmentally friendly equipment, tools, processes, and construction methods. Additionally, the integration of walking, biking, and jogging paths in the city's parks is an important ingredient for reducing emissions community-wide by increasing the connectivity of spaces for bicyclists and pedestrians. Eugene's urban forest and tree canopy cover has been reduced over the last several years due to environmental changes, large storm events, and select development pressures. The CAP 2.0 identified a significant goal to increase the urban tree canopy. Parks and Open Space manages the planting of over 1,500 trees every year through a variety of programs dedicated to clean water, clean air, habitat restoration, and carbon sequestration. It will be noted, or I will be noting in other program areas, additional efforts to support this CAP 2.0 goal. Next slide. So project highlights: the new facilities and rehabilitation of existing facilities category is the majority of the parks and open space projects in the CIP. Just a few new facilities include Ferndale Park, Maddie Reynolds Park, Phase 1 of Santa Clara Community Park, Phase 1 of the Sports Complex and Golden Gardens. And rehabilitation projects include Alton Baker Park, Berkeley Park, Tugman Park, Trainsong Park, park restroom renovations throughout the system, and park irrigation renovations throughout the system. Next slide. Trail improvements, path rehabilitation, and lighting projects include the Delta Ponds Trail Loop construction, Suzanne Arley Park Ridgeline Trail extension, and the replacement of inefficient lighting systems that will reduce an operational savings, and the installation of new lighting that will improve safety. The next program area is the Capital Stormwater Program. Stormwater capital projects typically reflect the comprehensive stormwater management plan and permit requirements, which are focused on protecting the environment and clean water. Next slide. The CIP includes $17.1 million of projects over the 6-year period. Funding is primarily from stormwater user fees and system development charges. The program looks to leverage funds to the maximum extent, often combining with parks and open space projects and transportation projects where there is scope and location alignment. The primary sources of greenhouse gas emissions associated with stormwater capital projects are construction-related activities and materials. When stormwater projects are coordinated with other programs projects, the overall greenhouse gas impacts can be reduced due to shared operations and trips. Certain stormwater capital projects, such as stream restoration and curbside rain gardens, will reduce greenhouse gas emissions primarily through the planting of vegetation, which effectively acts as a carbon sink. As mentioned in the Parks and Open Space section, the stormwater program is also intentionally supporting tree canopy goals outlined in the CAP 2.0 by looking for opportunities to include more street trees in the projects. Also, the standard specifications for construction have been updated for this next year to standardize the increased use of supplementary cementitious materials in concrete elements. These materials partially replace Portland cement concrete, which is a known significant contributor to embodied greenhouse gas emissions in public works construction. Next slide. Some examples of waterway and natural area enhancement projects include the Amazon Creek restoration in the area of the Lane Event Center and the East Santa Clara waterway improvements. Next slide. And water quality facilities and storm system rehabilitation projects include North Delta Highway stormwater facilities, several dry well elimination program projects, and several projects to address flooding and deteriorated pipe system conditions. And the next is the overview of the transportation program. So next slide. Most projects in the transportation system are derived from the 2035 Transportation System Plan and the 2017 Street Repair Bond, with a number of other guides and plans helping to prioritize the projects. Next slide. The CIP includes $84 million over the 6-year period for transportation projects. Primary funding sources include the 2017 Street Repair Bond, system development charges, local and state gas taxes. The city is also very successful in competing for transportation grants and uses those grants to leverage local funds as much as possible. Next slide. A large percentage of the overall community's greenhouse gas emissions are related to gasoline and diesel fuels used for transportation. As a result, constructing a transportation system that facilitates multimodal travel options, supports safe and efficient travel, and provides a strong flow of goods and services through the city can have a large impact on the community's overall greenhouse gas emissions. Project priorities include integration of complete streets design principles to support multimodal transportation, traffic operations and signal improvements, the use of construction materials and techniques with lower embodied greenhouse gas emissions. As mentioned in the Parks and Open Space section and the Stormwater section, the transportation program is also intentionally supporting tree canopy goals outlined in the CAP 2.0 by looking for opportunities to include more street trees in the projects. Also, as mentioned in the Stormwater section, the standard specifications for construction have been updated for this next year to standardize the use of supplementary cementitious materials in concrete elements and paving. These materials, as I stated before, partially replace Portland cement concrete, which is a significant contributor to the embodied greenhouse gas emissions in public works construction. Prior to this year, this was a project-specific specification rather than a standard, and this implements an action in the CAP 2.0 by updating the specification. Next slide. The street repair bond and the local gas tax fund the pavement preservation projects in the CIP. With the completion of the street repair bond in FY24, the backlog of needed repairs is expected to be $252 million in 10 years. The proactive treatment of streets before they fall into a condition needing more costly reconstruction is an important part to address this growing backlog. Federal transportation grant funds are also planned for bridge seismic retrofit projects. Next slide. Functional and safety improvements at various important intersections, such as 18th and Hilliard, Bailey Hill and Bertelson, and Division Avenue are included in the CIP. There are also local funded protected bikeway projects on Lincoln Street and Oakway Road. Next slide. And there are several grant-funded projects in the CIP that support multimodal transportation facilities, including the Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard Transit and Safety Improvements Project and the West Bank Path Extension from Beaver Street to Admiral Street. And finally, on to the wastewater program. Next slide. So these are the two plans that are used to identify capital project needs in the city wastewater system. Next slide. The CIP includes $18 million for the 6-year period for the capital wastewater system. Primary funding sources are local wastewater user fees and wastewater system development charges. A large percentage of the community's greenhouse gas emissions associated with the wastewater infrastructure are related to energy usage by pump stations and the treatment plant. As a result, projects that reduce the quantity of wastewater flow and in turn reduce the runtime of pump stations and the flows to be treated at the plant can have a large impact on the city's overall greenhouse gas emissions. Because of this, most projects are focused on reducing inflow and infiltration into the system from stormwater and groundwater and reducing maintenance issues. Next slide. Some wastewater project highlights include pipe and pump station rehabilitation projects that are focused on keeping the system operational and reducing system maintenance. Next slide. A significant portion of the capital wastewater program is focused on trenchless pipe rehabilitation. This work rehabilitates old pipes to like new condition with minimal waste of old materials and disruption to the traveling public and system use. Projects are identified from a wastewater flow model that staff can use to identify areas of high infiltration and inflow into the system and focus their attention. Often addressing these areas also reduces maintenance issues. The major rehabilitation projects in the CIP are focused on the Harlow Road and Patterson Street areas. And this completes the public works portion of the CIP presentation. Thanks.
Both. This slide is just a quick summary of what this process looks like. We've passed the February 18th Budget Committee meeting, and on March 8th, City Council will have a public hearing and action. And then the proposed CIP, adopted CIP, will then be incorporated into the capital portion of the FY22 proposed budget. Here's a quick recap of what we talked about today. I also wanted to say thank you to the City of Eugene staff who worked to put this document together. There are over 50 contributors from divisions across the city just for this document itself. And so we all have really appreciated working with them. And now we are prepared to take your questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Edwards, you'd like to lead us off.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a bunch of questions, but I'm guessing Commissioner Borowski is actually going to address some of these. So I'm just gonna narrow it down. As I'm looking at the slide, I think it's slide on page 6, it's the CIP by funding status. There's a bunch of bar charts there that talk about the funding identified. So just to preface, I think that all of these projects are really great and really needed, and you know, it's a lot of work that goes into this. But I'm wondering, there is funding identified, and then there is funding secured, and I'm curious to know, is there a third category that we're not seeing that maybe is funding that we really have no idea how we're going to pay for something? Because I think just my criticism of this process and what I have witnessed in the last few years, and I know it precedes me, is that the community gets behind projects and gets behind you know, everything that they'd like to see in the community, but then suddenly there is a price tag attached to it that they were unaware of when they approved moving forward with these. So I just want to be responsible in addressing that now, because I don't want to be you know, I don't want to be having to answer to the community that's saying, why did you approve a plan, or why did you know, not bring these things up in a forum that you could have. So I'm just curious, does this mean we aren't going to see fees and SDC charges and more need for bonds and levies and other kinds of things like that? Is that what this graph is saying here?
I think I might be able to partially answer that question. So when we do this process, where there are projects that are unidentified, there's no funding identified or even secured, we ask those projects to be included in our unfunded needs assessment. So these projects all have some sort of identified source, whether it's secured or not. So it's planning, maybe that there are SEC's funding or some other source like an FAA grant, or it's something that's been identified. Whether it's been secured or not is a different story. And again, you know, budget is always a plan. So these are the things that they know they want to put on our horizon, but plans change, and this is a 6-year, 7-year plan. So we're looking at things out into the future. So as it goes, as we move forward and budgets are approved, as Carrie said in the beginning, this the FY22 portion of this.
Appreciated hearing about the gains that we're making as a community. My questions are about the airport, and it's good to hear that we are trending a little bit better than the rest of the country currently. because of the pandemic, and that we have received CARES funding. But I'm also tracking other projections for travel in the United States around this particular industry, that there expect to be as much as 30% or more decrease in travel. You know, the new normal is not going to be the new normal. So I'm curious if we have thought about that in terms of the projected needs for expansion at the airport. It's quite a sizable investment, though it does look like a lot of it's coming from the FAA. And I did also have questions about the automated car wash facility. I'm wondering if 100% of that is going to come from the rental car industry through the customer facility charges and the agency leases, or if additional dollars will need to come from other places.
So for details on your questions, I'm probably going to have to follow up with Catherine Stevens, our airport manager, just for the details. But my understanding is that she is they are tracking those things, and that this CIP does reflect the best information that they have at this time.
And regarding the cost of the automated car wash facility?
Again, I would just rely on what the CIP actually shows of where the funding is going to come from. And I don't think that they're anticipating that they would need to use other funds for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Taylor, followed by Borowski.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure how to answer this question, or if there's been any creative thought or precedent. It's really going to Commissioner Edwards as well as Tom McMahon's question, and then your response, Jennifer, recognizing it's a plan. Are there tools, are there some kind of proactive tools that we can use to ensure, that means maybe other funding buckets or something to ensure that the funding is there for the prioritized projects, so we aren't losing the trust or priorities of the projects that have been identified simply because funding falls apart or isn't available. And I know that's a difficult question, but I'm just curious, because I'm sure this is not the first time you've thought about that.
So yeah, I can talk on the public works side. So we do use some projections, and I feel like, knowing what I know about a lot of the projections we use, there is some conservatism that's built into those, because for sure we don't want to identify a bunch of projects that we have no money to construct and made promises to folks. And I would say that our track record kind of bears that out, because most of the time, if projects are delayed or canceled, it's usually more about a public engagement process and a planning process rather than not having the funding, and just because we want to make sure that we get the project right before we go forward. And there is some information in the CIP, I didn't include it in my slides, but around all the criteria that we use for project selection and prioritization. I would say if something really unexpected happened and we just did not have the funding come in that we expected, we would go back and rely on that criteria of how did we prioritize projects, and make sure that we stay honest with that too. Just because I think it is much more transparent for us to be using the prioritization criteria that's been developed that takes into account all these plans. But and I just kind of want to add on to a little bit of what Vicki said, at least for on the public works side of the projects. When we say funding identified, that means that either the funding has been identified in the funding agency's plan. So like if we're getting a grant from ODOT, then it's shown in the ODOT plan that that project is getting the funding. We just don't show it as secured until we sign that IGA with ODOT that gives us the money. So it isn't, though, when we say funding identified, it's not really pie in the sky kind of funding that we hope that we'll get this. It's pretty well identified. I don't want to say secure because we haven't actually signed the contract yet, but it is in those other agencies' plans that our projects would be funded.
Okay, Commissioner Borowski, followed by Commissioner Beeson.
Thank you. I have a question and then I've got a comment. Questions for Jeff. I know that there's an industry standard of percentage of repair and maintenance as opposed to the current value of the city's assets. And I think it's targeted at 2 to 4% is what the industry standard at. Do you know where we are at? Historically, it's been usually below 1% of our assets. Is that something that you have?
Yeah, you know, I'm not looking at it right now, but I'm pretty sure it's right about 1.7%. It usually hovers right around 1.7 to 1.8. That's a budgeting tool as well. So our asset values will change year to year too. So that number changes because just the value of the building might go up or go down too. So.
Okay, thank you. And so this is the 8th CIP that I've reviewed over my tenure on budget committee and other things. And I'm just going to speak to the car wash. So the car wash is a $6 million build. There was a car wash in the 2012 CIP at $2.3 million that was constructed. The car wash that's there right now was constructed with rental car dollars, $2.3 million in 2012. Right now, we're going to do a $6 million car wash. Again, funded with $3 a day fees from the rental car industry. I just ran some numbers. We could hire 5 people, pay them $52,000 a year, $25 an hour, plus benefits, bring it to $88,000 a year. We could pay them that amount of money for 13 years with $6 million. So you could have 5 people full-time washing cars for the same price. Just something to have. The reason I bring that up is because the rental car companies ask for this. They say, we want an automated car wash and we'll fund it with our fees. And I say, okay, that's fine. But I think that in the future, those $3 fees could be better spent to help offset some of the carbon that is being put up through those rental cars, rather than using them for a $6 million car wash. So that's just a statement that I wanted to put out there. And this kind of also goes back to what Ed McMahon brought up. We approved these plans. We approved the airport master plan. We did that. This commission did that a few months back. And in that airport master plan was this car wash. So when we approved the master plan, we approved the car wash, not knowing that it was a $6 million car wash. And now it comes home with CIP. So just wanted to make a comment on that. Thank you.
Commissioner Beeson, I'm going to put myself in line, then we'll have Commissioner Fregula after me.
Thanks. A couple of things. First off, to everybody who's talked to us here and all the other 50 people or so out there, thank you very much. This is I think, a very good document. Spent some time with it. I've seen it, as Commissioner Borowski has. I've seen this a number of times over the years. I haven't looked at it for a few years. I definitely appreciate, as Commissioner Fragula said, the addition of the greenhouse gas reporting information that's in there. Also, your identification of operating costs as you go forward is kind of an attribute of describing some of these projects for evaluation. But I think the whole thing is very informative and comprehensive. Also appreciate the organization of it. I have, I guess, 2 questions, and I don't need you to go into a lot of detail. But my first one, and I may have just missed the boat here somewhere. I'm not sure. But what about the City Hall and the other improvements there in the park blocks. If I'm looking at this plan, and again, I may have missed something, but it appears there's nothing going on with City Hall for the next 6 years. Is that right?
Yeah, those questions were brought up at the budget committee meeting. Those are URA projects at this point. So the park blocks and town square, which would include City Hall, are all a part of the URA, which are not included in the CIP.
Well, okay. Okay.
They have in the past, yeah.
All right. Well, if that's how it's done, I'm not here to argue with that. I kind of was thinking of the capital. I'll go ahead and say it anyway. The capital plan for the city of Eugene, in a broad sense, would be funding of all the assets that the city would end up owning. And then the way I go through this document, you're also going through in pretty great detail and showing separate funding sources for everything. So I don't know, it doesn't jump out at me why we wouldn't have a city hall in there and show the funding sources being the urban renewal district.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know the history of why the is not included in the CIP, and I'm happy to, Jeff, you raising your hand. For sure.
I feel like I should clarify. So the City Hall portion of the project is, that would be city funds, general fund. The URA portion of it is the town square, blocks, farmers market. And so that's an excellent question. It came up at council. We're going to follow up with planning staff on that one, because it seems like we probably should get that one into the CIP. It's not, to my knowledge, it's not scheduled immediately. The way that project's rolling out is a phase project, with the farmers market being the first part of that, and then City Hall planning coming afterward. And so we'll definitely have a discussion about that as we go forward.
Yeah, I understood it to be phased, and I know those take a number of years. I was just thinking something would show up. So my other question, I'm not sure if this is for Jennifer or Carrie, or anyway, it has to do kind of with aging infrastructure, and I think what you guys call preservation and maintenance. And there's a lot of good material in here on that. Appreciate it. I'm just sort of interested in all that based on my prior life at an electric utility. I noticed a statement that you guys had in the plan, and I'm gonna just kind of call it out. You talk about preservation and maintenance at all the different areas and how you approach that and the philosophy of it and so on. But you have a statement in there that inadequate funding for preservation programs in both general fund and areas such as transportation have resulted in a backlog. I'm kind of wanting you to talk maybe generally a little bit about that. It's just sort of a general question about, is the city of Eugene pretty well keeping up on these sorts of things, or do you think we're falling behind? I mean, I suspect you have just clearly a great number of facilities out there that have been put in over the last 40, 50 years that require some level of either replacement or preservation and so on. So are we pretty much up to speed, or are we losing ground, or what's going on there?
So I can speak to that as far as the buildings go. Commissioner Borowski touched on it just a moment ago. Right. The funding, there's a percentage of asset value that we target, and we're below the lower end of that. And if we never did any projects like the bond projects, we would be falling behind. But we've had a lot of bond type projects, fire projects over the years, fire stations, police headquarters, which was funded differently, but we moved forward with that. And then the recent Parks and Rec bond projects. And so what that does is, rather than have perhaps a higher ongoing funding source for preservation and maintenance, we're able to get in there and do some of these major renovations that keep us at a good level where we're at. You saw that on the deficiency charts that we showed earlier. And so I think from that standpoint, we're doing all right.
Okay.
Sure, I would love to have more more funding as we go forward, but we have to manage within our means too. So.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. I appreciate it. Thanks.
So I have a couple of observations and then a question. One of the observations, obviously coming to this cold, first time I've seen it, had a couple days to think about it and look at it. And I think what I'm missing a little bit is this sort of context of history. You mentioned a couple of projects that have already been completed, so they're not in this program, but I think they were examples of projects that were like what you were doing. And again, not paying 100% attention here, that's a little confusing. So if you were able to, maybe in each category, you could say, and I'm thinking of street rehabilitation, for example, you could just say, here's the 18 or 28 or how many ever projects are that are funded, maybe done or in progress that aren't in this CIP, but they represent where we've been. That just helps me with context. Otherwise, it's harder for me. Now, everybody else, I'm sure, sees this all the time. So the second comment was, how do we relate this to our work as a planning commission? And is there a way, if we do this again, we could actually fine tune the presentation so it aligned more with things that are near and dear to us? And currently I'm thinking of things like House Bill 2001, which is going to result in a higher density in residential areas. And that then turns into a demand for parks and transportation. And so are the other systems that are funded by this sort of keeping track with these things that are coming over our transom and saying, wait a minute, more density. Well, are we sort of minding the rest of the stuff? And I realize it touches everything, right? It's sewers, it's stormwater, but some of them seem like they're better taken care of than others, and some are going to be more critical than others. So that just sort of two comments. And then my last question, again, from complete ignorance. This is a 5-year CIP. How is it done every 2 years? How does it, so it's updated every 2 years and it covers the span of 5 years. So then, but the funding comes, and this is a classic facilities planning issue. The funding comes annually, right? The funding it's a 1-year budget for the city. It's not a 2-year budget. So effectively what you're saying is that every 2 years, you're going to start over. So it's a 5-year plan, but it's going to have these 2 years of projects that are really likely to get funded the first 2 years.
Right. Yeah. One of the things, so this is my first time actually really being super involved in the CIP. And even at that, I was, kind of at a higher level. But one of the things that I saw as we were doing this was a little bit of a lack of making connections between previous projects or previous year's plans and what happened to something when it dropped off. And so, and then also our mid-year on these 2 years, we also don't do a great job, honestly connecting what we planned in the first year and what happened in the second year. So we have plans this go around as we prepare for the FY23 budget to make better connections between whether something was actually done. So it was in the CIP, is it done? And if not, why? So you would see that in the FY23 budget document, not a CIP, but then that would actually flow into the next round of CIP. So that is a goal. I noticed as we were doing this that there was some disconnect in projects and plans that were moving forward and rolling on and or rolling off of a budget. So I always look for those opportunities to be better storytellers, and I recognize that process is
right.
mid-year. Yeah.
It's seared into my memory, having been to the legislature many times, and finally learning that part of what the story is of what did you give us last time? Because from their perspective, you're just ask. And we forget to go back and say, oh no, wait a minute, we did all these good things based on your work. So it's sort of, it's like branded in my memory. So Commissioner Fragola, yes.
Thank you. So there, briefly heard Jeff mention equity in contracting, and I heard and I saw some examples of job fairs and some strategies, but what are our goals in equity and contracting?
I mean, we don't have specific targets. As far as our goals, and Vicky's on this call too. And so we work really, really closely with purchasing on really ours are really focused on recruiting contractors and being accessible to folks so they can do, different work for the city and get opportunities when maybe they wouldn't otherwise be able to. And, so through job fairs and things like that. But as far as specific targets, we haven't established targets. I know there are some projects out there, and I think they're probably more on the public works side of things where there are some different targets and things like that are federally funded. But with our internal city funded projects, we do that a little bit differently. And it's really more an organic process and outreach and doing everything we can when we bid out projects, bid out smaller projects so they're a little bit more accessible for folks and not as hard to get a bond and that sort of thing.
Right. I'll just pick up where Jeff stated there. The city has not done the study that would allow it to set specific goals for our contracting. But as Jeff mentioned, on our federally funded projects, we do use goals that are set by the state based on the work that we're doing and the area that we're in. And so you will see that we do have some projects that do have specific goals set aside for disadvantaged and minority and women-owned businesses.
Let's speak from the purchasing side of things, and because that is my group, and their efforts are really around just trying to increase contracting. And as Jennifer said, we have not done a very extensive study that would allow us to do targeting. However, that being said, especially through the pandemic, we're really working with people all across the organization to buy locally, to look at how we can expand the marketplace and build a stronger marketplace in our area for contractors in all areas. But they've been working a lot on how to expand that pool of applicants for various projects and the barriers that exist for some of the smaller vendors.
Great, thanks for adding that, Vicki.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, other comments or questions from commissioners? It's been a terrific presentation, an amazing amount of information in a very short time. I'm glad that we had the chance to see it, and really I feel like we engaged it properly, and it's a remarkable body of work, and thank you all for doing it. And then, as you say, Vicki's telling the story is so much of it. I think you all are doing a great job of that too. So we really appreciate you taking the time to come bring this to our attention. I hope we weren't too hard on you with our questions, and I hope you'll feel like you can come back and feel good about what you did.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're on to agenda item letter D on our agenda, which is items from commission and staff. Do we have anything from the staff today? I see, one commissioner's got her hand up. You want to go first, Commissioner Taylor?
Well, this is a little personal, but I just want to wish Commissioner Edwards a happy birthday because I think today is her birthday.
Wow. Wait,
Happy
today's
birthday.
The 22nd? It's like 22222?
222. Yeah, thank you. It is
happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Wait till next year, it'll be 22222.
I know, 22222.
Wow.
I can't wait.
Happy birthday. Well, I hope you spend it better than the last 90 minutes. No, wait, I shouldn't say that. Somewhere in the range of how good your day is. I hope it's above what we just did.
Thank you, guys.
And Commissioner Ramey, I do have a couple staffing updates if now's time. And so, like, they're not staffing updates, they're really schedule updates. So you don't meet again until Tuesday the 9th. And that will be on the Middle Housing Project, HB 2001. And then your next meeting following that is Monday, March 22nd. And that will be an update on the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan. It's been a little bit since that project's come to you. So big update there. Tonight at City Council at the 5:30 work session is the work session on commercial setbacks. That's the one where council had directed that we adjust building setbacks in the commercial zones. It got kicked from a previous work session, so it's going tonight at 5:30. And then just another reminder that recruitment closes for the Planning Commission and all the other boards and commissions that are recruiting on March 12th. So I put a plug out there because you guys are always our best recruiters. So thank you for that.
Okay, very good. Yes, Commissioner Taylor.
Thanks. Alyssa, are you allowed, or is there an appropriate time where you could let us know how many people have expressed interest so that if we need to get out there and hit the pavement harder, we can?
Yeah, we typically get an update on the number of folks probably sometime soon. So I can pass that on. And, you know, if we've got like 2 people in, we usually like to have more than that for sure. We'd like to have a healthy pool of applicants. And so, yeah, I'm pretty certain I'm able to let you know at least the number of folks who've applied. So I will keep you posted on that.
Commissioner Borowski, yes.
Thank you. Just a question. We talked early on in this year's Planning Commission goals to have a goal-setting retreat. We're coming up on March. The tenure of this commission runs through June. I'm just wondering the status of that. I know I will be not here after June, but I still think it would be important to have that goal setting thing to set priorities for our commission. And I would really like to have input on that. So I'm just wondering if you've given any more thought to that and whether that's going to happen or not in this year.
Yes, it is on my mind. It is on my to-do list, and my plan is that it will happen within the next couple of months. There have been a couple of things we've been waiting on. One, we're kind of mid-budget cycle, so kind of waiting to see where things land there. And then I know that housing is a topic near and dear to your hearts, and there is a work session on housing tools and strategies at council coming up. I believe it's March 10th. So I kind of wanted to time it so that you all would be able to watch that work session before having your Planning Commission retreat. But thank you again for the reminder. I have it on my list this week to look for potential dates, and then we'll be able to pull you for that now that these other things are kind of falling into place. So I appreciate your persistence on that. And I agree, it's an important meeting for you all just to be thinking about, you know, what's coming up. And we can also talk about operational things. I've heard from some folks that daytime meetings are challenging for some. So, you know, I think there's a number of things we can talk about, both kind of goal setting and then just more operational.
Okay. Gosh, we have 1 minute left. Anything else? All right. Let's not waste any more of Commissioner Edwards' birthday with our meeting here. Happy birthday to you. We'll see you all the next meeting on March 9th. We're adjourned.